Welcome to the Call to Defend podcast, where we had a bit of a rocky start to this series. I am Caleb Elliott. This is Josh Davis, and we are back with some strong puns. Josh, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm getting over strep throat, which has not been fun. Never had strep throat before. Thanks.
Really?
I've never had it. No, I've never had it.
Really?
My cousins had it.
Classic.
My mother's had it. I don't think my dad has had it while I was around, but so many people in my life have had it, and I just never had it. And then I just got slammed with it this past weekend. I got home from church, looked at my puppies, I let them outside, walked back in.
All three of them?
I just laid down. I was like, I'm not getting up. And then I tried. I was like, I actually can't get up. I'm down. I'm done. I think I might have had more than just strep throat. I might have had something else too, but whatever, strep and something else just took me out for like 3 days. It was not fun. So I'm actually doing okay today. I can actually talk, which I couldn't do on the stream yesterday, which is why I didn't hop on. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's
clear to go back to work.
Really.
Okay.
So, actually, kind of a downgrade.
Okay. Whatever. Anyway, so mountains.
Yes.
Actually, hold on. How are you? I didn't ask you that.
I'm not too bad. I'm getting over an illness myself. I think you can probably still a little bit hear it in my schnoz there. I had pretty heavy congestion Saturday evening. Heavier still into Sunday morning, and I was really tired. And then like Sunday evening, I was full on like vertigo. Like I was really, my sinuses really stuffed up, and so I was like really dizzy, pretty lightheaded. And then pretty much by Monday, I just had a little bit of a congestion and a cough, and I'm pretty much better by now. Just a little lingering nasal. So
I'll have to say, this is why you guys didn't get an episode last week.
Yeah.
That and extremely busy schedules.
Yeah.
Because we were busy, and then we had backup times, and then we were both sick during those backup times. And he was like, man, sickness is not an issue. I should be fine. It's like, Caleb, I can't sit up. Never mind. We're screwed.
Yeah. Well, because Mountains is really kind of your series. So like, if I'm sick in the background, they're just going to get a few nasally comments here and there. If you can't sit up, we don't have a recording.
Well, I guess so. At least for the Old Testament. I think as we go on, since your specialty has been Greek, I was telling a few friends that what I think that has been helpful for both of us is that as we go through this, one, it forces me to work ahead and dive into it. So when we get to New Testament, I write things back in my mind, but also it kind of preps you, since you're also the Greek guy. So when you're reading New Testament, you are like able to see it quicker in terms of the Greek language. And I'm just picking up on the translation, like how they're flipping it quickly. And so you get like the English brain and the Greek brain, or the Hebrew brain and the Greek brain, reading these together. So also I think
like we kind of planned it that way.
Oh, also I think that you've actually, well, I can just do that. It's a sister language.
Yeah.
But they were like,
but then I'm only bringing Greek to the table. Like you're bringing the Old Testament languages, right? You got two there. I'm just bringing Greek. Maybe I'll learn Latin.
Yeah, but Old Testament, New Testament. But also you have the Septuagint in the Greek, so you technically have the whole Bible.
True. Yeah, get fricked.
So you have the whole Bible. Sorry, you have half the Bible in the translation.
There you go.
And I have half the Bible in the translation, aka English. Until I learn English. Until I learn Greek. Shoot.
Yeah. One of these days, Josh, you really should learn English.
Anyways, but yeah, I was telling them, I think that one, I've appreciated because one, of course, it gets me to see things quicker when I go into the New Testament. But I think also it's been appreciating for you, at least based on seeing how you've been handling, like when we did like the Chaos Waters. Because when you had your turn to do notes, you were like unraveling things. Like I already found them, but because you could see the Greek clearer than I could, you were like, yeah, but see how the Greek does this? This is how it's paralleling what he's doing here because this is what it means in this tense. I was like, what? What? I didn't catch that at all. What? um. So yeah,
Well,
I
and
think
like you do the same thing though with Hebrew, right? Of like just consider yesterday, right, where you had that thing that I could not. I was reading it, and I was like, "There's no way I'm going to be able to pronounce that right." And it was this thing of like, yeah, because the Hebrew context makes this, this, and this clear, and I was like, "Sure, yep, okay." I have no idea, but
But yeah, so we're gonna be. This is episode 2, but I guess it's technically the beginning, in some sense, of the actual study of mountains and our theme study. Which interesting thing is that you can go to Genesis 1 and develop something. I actually would rather save that for a later passage for how it uses language that we can see how, because it's the same author, how Genesis 1 and that chapter parallels each other. So, because I don't want to jump to there just yet, because it would seem like a stretch if I started Genesis 1, honestly, without that other chapter to kind of show how it's reflecting backwards on that stuff. It makes more sense to go to Genesis 2, because this is like, if you remember, we talked about as mountains being like the place of the gods, the place like the region of the heavenly realm, and all those kinds of things, like the sacred place. Genesis 2 is like the chapter of describing like this is like the place. Like besides like Revelation, where it's talking about like the new creation and being like in God's like holy city and all that stuff. Like this is like the bookends of it. Like here is God's dwelling place, and then here's God's dwelling place. Humans started here, humans will return here. And they're like this nice little bookend of it. And so it
yeah,
just kind of makes sense to go with the actual like depiction of the mountain rather than just going over what could be a mountain and not really explain how until much, much later. So yeah, we're going to go to Genesis 2, which will be fun. And I have a lot of notes. I'm so sorry. I'm not going to read them all, I promise.
I'm not surprised. I
I will,
would like to go to bed at a semi-reasonable time.
I'm not going to read all 7 pages of notes.
Good grief. All right, let's do it.
So our first biblical mountain. So let's go to Genesis 2, verse 4. We're not going to start at verses 1 and 3 because verses 1 and 3, in my opinion, I think is poorly placed. It's just there more for tradition now, in my opinion. 1 and 3 is day 7. That is supposed to be the completion of the Genesis 1 narrative and the
I
breaking
thought you
off.
meant I thought you
No, I
we
don't
were
mean the
about to
actual verses themselves.
I was gonna
Not
say
committing
we were
heresy.
about to pause the recording and have a very long
No,
conversation.
I was not committing heresy. My point was that I think is unfortunately put the chapter marker there because
Okay. All right.
it's
I get you.
it's it's kind of when we were talking about the Sermon on the Mount. Like there's a bunch of like interjectors that make it feel like it's so choppy and you don't see the flow. I mean, that's all the Bible in general, but like that's like smack at the tail end of the narrative of the creation narrative and just
Yeah.
cuts off the end. Like, oh, yeah, here's chapter 2. Why? You have another subheading at verse 4. Why didn't you just put it at first? Why should verse 4, verse 1?
We almost had a very long conversation, my
No, we
friend.
were not. I'm not committing heresy. I'm not going that direction. So yeah, let's go to verse 4. So I'll read the ESV for now, but I do make a translation change in my personal notes, just to kind of show the point of the interestingness of there's of one of the words there. So let's just start with the first verse. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. I mean, I think we probably read that. I think we kind of just glossed by it pretty quickly. So let me kind of point something out. Let me reread it. Bayom Yahweh Elohim made Eretz v'Shamayim. So Shamayim we've mentioned is the upper waters multiple times. Eretz is the land. So I think those are just familiar words. I gotta throw this out there. Yahweh's God. I'm sorry, Yahweh is the Lord's name, God, Elohim. But there's a new word there. This is the birthings of the sky and the land when they're created, when Yahweh, God, made the land and the skies. I think that's really interesting that, because the reason I used that form is that the Toledot and every verse is used in Genesis is one used to begin a new section of the narrative, which is typically used to tie to descendants of a person. Like in every other case in Genesis is tied to a genealogy. except for this part here. This is the one spot it is used not in a genealogy within the Hebrew. And I think that's interesting because we have, even if we just ignored that, this entire statement is a parallel of the first opening verse of the entire book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the beginning of the sky and the land when they're created, when God made the land and the sky. They're paralleled verses right there.
Yeah, I'm curious, Josh, for the words there that you have for, um, right. So when it says, in verse 4, when they were made in the day the Lord made the heaven and the earth, is that the same word in Hebrew for made?
Uh, these are the birthings of the sky and the land at their creating on the day of making of Yahweh God of the earth and the skies.
Okay, so then creating and making, that's two different words?
Yes, they are.
Okay, interesting. Because it is in the Greek too.
Yes.
But the Greek, so it uses egeneto and epoise. Those two words generally mean similar things, which is making or doing, right? So, but they're not really interchangeable. I'd have to look more into how they're used specifically in the Septuagint, but in the New Testament, generally egeneto is more making and epoise is more doing. But it is more like of a causal doing. It's not just a generally, and I did this. Uh, but epoiesis definitely can be, and I did that, right? So it's an interesting choice in word there. I'd have to look more into how they use it in the Septuagint. I don't know. That just stuck
Yeah.
out to me. There's two different words there.
Yeah, there are two different words in Hebrew too. What's interesting is that the Genesis 1 narrative, they also use two different words that don't necessarily mean the same thing, but they're used as if they're synonyms, which is creating and to make in Genesis 1. Like I say, he'll say, I'm going to create this. And then he says, and he made this. And
Yeah.
but
So
they also like play into that whole, they're not quite the exact same, but they're being used interchangeably in the same time.
yeah. So I guess then perhaps how I'm looking at it, right? Because you have egeneto, which is um this idea of, right, as I said, like making. Perhaps the former word is more so the act of, and the latter word is the completion of. Right. So um you have in the Greek, this is the sorry, as I said to Josh before we started recording, the book, this book, uh, because that's actually how the Greek works there. It's, if you were to translate it literally, it would be this book. But this is the book is how we would Romanize it, I suppose. Uh, that's not the right word I'm looking for. Whatever. This is the book of the beginning of the heavens and the earth. And then it's, oh my goodness. So there's actually, I feel like, words missing here from the Septuagint, because you have this making, or this make, um, which wouldn't really make sense. So we would probably more accurately translate like when they are made, right? Or when they are being made or whatever.
So there might be how they use it for the Greek. I will say for the Hebrew, if you go back to like, for instance, day 6, they do an inversion of the example I gave you. Like I said, sometimes they create it and then make. In day 6, when it refers to man, he says, let us make man, and this is God created man. So they also kind of reverse it. Maybe in the Greek they do that. I'd have to look into the Septuagint grammar choices that they're making
Yeah, I have
with
no
you.
idea.
But regarding the Hebrew one, they don't necessarily play into it that way. But that might be a Greek thing to do, based on whatever rules they're probably following, or lack of, maybe, too, depending on the time period they're working at. But I think ultimately my point is that it's interesting is that in this opening verse, you get like a statement of creation. Is like, which to me as a reader, I kind of glossed over. But when, after studying Genesis 1 for a long time and then doing all these projects we've been doing, starting at Genesis 1, you get to Genesis 2 and you're like, wait, we end with the whole things are created, things are good. And now we're starting this whole statement over again, almost like it's paralleling backwards. So the question is, are we restating it? Are we starting something new? We look at the rule for Toledot it's pretty much always as a looking forward thing. So it's like, here's a new section, we're moving forward. So it's kind of like a saying, hey, day 7, done. Here's your real chapter heading right here. This is the new section. We're starting a new narrative. This is the generation where everything began. It's kind of like, wait, we just got this narrative. But what's interesting about this narrative is it's very different and yet very similar to the first narrative. Verse 5, when no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh God had not caused it to rain on the land, for there was no man to work the ground. So we get 3 problems here, stated here, which is interesting because that's also paralleling back to Genesis 1, where we had majorly 2 problems that were primarily in the way. Genesis 1, with the issue of perpetual water and darkness. Like, does chaos water and darkness over, there is no land. It's all as formless and void. It's tohu vavohu and describes the tohu vavohu as perpetual darkness and water. Now we have 3 problems where there's no vegetation, there's no human, and there's no water. Which is interesting because we just had a whole narrative of how there's so much water and now there's no water.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just weird to think about. Like, you just spent a whole narrative to talk about how everything's created. And now we're saying, hey, here's how everything became created. Here's the birth of the universe. Here's how everything came to be. There's no water. Wait, wasn't there just water? Yeah, no, there's no water right now. We're doing and so there's a lot of different views on how we try to parallel these two. People spend a lot of time on like the question of like the vegetation and the human. I think it's interesting that those are definitely parts we should consider. But there's also the question of the water. But you and I have talked about how that the Bible also plays into the dry land as being an uncreated wilderness, decreation.
Right. Yes.
And so I'm going to say that this is almost like taking a different perspective on the creation narrative. It's not a contradicting one. It's not one that's trying to shoehorn itself into a previous day. It's here's one way that creation is established, and here's another way to see how creation is established.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of funny now to view that sort of thing, right? Because you get, and perhaps something you're going to touch on a lot, right? But you get sort of like mountains in arid areas, right? Like mountains in, right? For example, Sinai is in the middle of the freaking desert,
right?
And all the mountains that we see generally in Scripture, we have to remember are basically in the desert. There's the mountains around Jerusalem, which are probably a little bit greener, but still they're mountains in the Middle East.
Right.
Right. Like you're going to get some pretty hot, dry weather there.
Yeah.
And so as much as we think about the sea being this untamable beast that, can't really be known, we have to remember there are vast stretches of desert that probably to this day no human being has ever walked. At least none that have lived to tell about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? Because the desert is so vast beyond our knowledge. And in many ways, that in itself is very incomprehensible. And just as equally unknowable as the vastness of the ocean, right? It's kind of funny. We have, the Dune Sea.
Yeah.
Right. This stretch of sand that we just don't understand, really. And we use the word sea. Right? It's the same thing, right? The waters and the dry land, they're both just these forces of chaos. And in the midst of it is man. Or at least not yet.
But
Getting ahead of ourselves there, but not yet in the narrative.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, like that whole idea of like there's areas that we have not there's no one who can really survive out in the sea, and people can't really survive out in the desert. They're both like places like decreation can happen, disorder can happen, things that can happen. And the wilderness is sometimes used almost like a testing thing. And we're not really here to talk about the test and the wilderness, but they play into that language because humans can at least walk out there. They might not survive out there, but they can at least walk out there. Whereas the water, once they go out, they're either going down and drowning or they're hopefully in a boat. And that might get
Or
crashed into.
Matthew
And
14.
or Matthew 14, exactly. But I remember like growing up, like, how do I try to understand the parallels between the two? And one that kind of was helpful was like, okay, Genesis 1 kind of like provides like, here's the ideal of creation. Everything's in order and everything's set aside to where it's supposed to be. Man is ruling. It's like, okay, Genesis 2. Let's tell the same narrative from a different perspective. We're going to go through things quickly because what we're going to see here is we're also going to see how here's what things are supposed to be, and here are they've quickly gone to what they're not, or what they're not anymore. And we've gotten to a place of like disorder living in the human lives rather than it just being a thing out there that we're called to go conquer is now a thing that's present within us. And this idea is like these are two narratives with two different scopes looking on the same kind of event. Kind of lets you let the text breathe and see, interesting, because you can start to see a lot of the Genesis 1 parallels already. Again, we have the opening statement, which is similar to the opening statement of Genesis 1:1. You have the issue of there is too much water and now there's no water, or in this case, there's too much dry land and there's no water. Both of which humans need both for survival. They need water for hydration and they need dry land, to live on. Humans also need vegetation. Well, that was also an issue that was not present within the other one because there's too much water. In this case, there's no water, so therefore vegetation can't live, so humans can't have that. Which ultimately means there's no human. There's no life. There is no human. Both issues state that there's no human because these two things take place.
And it's interesting that it's the extremes, right?
Yes.
There is far too much water and there is no water, right? That there isn't, right, in that balance, right? That perfect moderation, I guess you would say, right? To pull in a little bit of Aristotle. In all things, moderation is a virtue, which isn't inherently true, but I digress. There is this moderation, right? That's where man is to dwell, right? And in that sense, it's very much indicative of, it's Ecclesiastes, I want to say 8. Not exactly sure the chapter. I could be way off on that. I know it's in Ecclesiastes. But where Solomon says, don't be overly wicked and also don't be overly righteous. Right? Don't stray to the extremes. Because the overly wicked, obviously, you're in wickedness, right? I'd compare that to the sea, right? You're just in full chaos at that point. You are just in full degeneracy and just fleeing from everything that God has before you. But also don't be overly righteous, because then you will end up in a very similar situation, right? You'll end up devoid of water.
Yeah.
Right? Water, yes, is this chaotic, unknowable thing, but at the same time, it's still essential for life.
Yeah.
Right? Just as you were talking about now, right? You need water. You need this life-bringing element, which can destroy you, right? And there's a lot that can be said there, but I want to stay on the topic of mountains. It is 10 o'clock at night. It's funny how we are to avoid the extremes, right? That's kind of the idea that I think is getting at here, right? Just as Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, just as we're saying here, avoid extremes. Don't go too far to one side.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think just to caveat this further, like this is also the Eden creation narrative, which is another thing to show that this is not a narrative that is meant to necessarily be like picked up and placed into another narrative. Like this is its own narrative, its own telling of creation. And what it's saying and what it's doing is instead of talking about the entirety of the cosmos, it's treating the entirety of the cosmos as this is a specific spot. This is what it means to be created, is to be in this place. Which I think that there's a whole other discussion to have there, but I think that'd be a better serve for like a heaven related podcast, like heaven and earth, which I know mountains are like a heaven earth meeting spot, but a specific looking at the phrasings of heaven and earth and how they correspond together, how they're parallel, but also how they're like separate from each other because of sin versus like, here's the meeting spot. This is where they're supposed to be together. And so I think that'd be better served for another time. But that the idea is kind of laying in here. And you can just start to see so many things just start paralleling. Like I remember hearing someone talk about how, well, we don't live by faith. We live by faith, but not by sight. That was the correct quotation, not the one I almost heretically said. We live by faith, not by sight. And they almost were like, yeah, well, so obviously the opposite of faith is sight. And I chimed in like, well, if we think about what happens in the garden narrative, we have either we trust on God's wisdom or we rely on our own senses. So it's not the idea of like sight's bad. It's the idea of, okay, faith, and faith is in what? Your reliance on God, your trust is in God, or by sight, which means you're relying on yourself. So it's the whole idea of going back to the Proverbs of the way that seems right to man is the way that leads to death, which plays back onto Genesis 3. Is Eve going to trust in God's wisdom or her wisdom? And that's the whole narrative that's playing. And Jesus is just taking another play of words, if you will, and putting that on that very same topic, that very same motif that's being repeated over and over and over again. And so I think you were right to call that out. I haven't thought about the Ecclesiastes, but like, yeah, even with like the domains being extremes, completely dry and completely wet, you would expect that if this was a expansion on Genesis 1, that the land would already be wet, considering that when the land came up and vegetation did grow, that happened after the water was moved over, like in the same day. So is obviously,
yeah, and we have to consider, right, the events that have preceded the writing of Genesis, right? Because the Israelites are in the midst of the Exodus when this is being written, right? Moses is writing this.
They're in the middle of the desert.
And so, right, they're in the middle of the desert, right? That's exactly what I'm getting at, right? So you have the event where they have now left Egypt behind by crossing the Red Sea, right? Crossing this huge body of water that as we very funnily said, decreated the Egyptians. Which again, I just love that way of putting it. Decreated them, all right. Right, but it is this huge, chaotic, for lack of a better word, like monster-ish entity, right? The Red Sea. They are now wandering around Negev, right? They are wandering around the desert.
Yeah.
This to them is also just a place of unknowability.
Yeah. It's a place where they could completely be decreated, if you will. And many of them are because of their lack of faithfulness in God and their disobedience. In fact, there's an entire generation forbidden from going to Canaan because of their disobedience, and they're left in the wilderness. And then there's their descendants who continue on. But yeah, that's just kind of how it plays into these different narratives and how they all kind of play together. And the background, like you said, with them being in Egypt, like you have with Genesis 1, where it kind of like engaged in discussion on one hand, on multiple fronts, actually. You have it competing with the Egyptian narrative where God is born out of the waters. And then, but in this case, God is already above the waters. He's not born from it. He just already is there. But then the other narratives, they fight something. And this one, he doesn't fight, he just speaks. But now you have this one, it's like, all right, desert. Hey, that sounds familiar. We're here. And he's like, yeah, there's a place where there is a true garden spot. And while Canaan is not quite Eden, it's going to be your mini Eden, if you will. It's going to become your Eden. And that was part of the whole excitement of going to Canaan. Like, this is part of the recreation. It's part of the whole recreation narrative. We're going back to Eden in a sense. And even though they don't quite fully go back to Eden, there's still a day where we would truly go back to Eden in its fullest sense, which is a really awesome, cool, and beautiful thing. Okay, so verse 6, and a mist or a stream was going up from the land and was watering the whole face of the ground. And what's interesting is that the word for watering and the face of the ground, yes, there's the irrigation language, but they're also used of humans and like them taking a drink and a human's face in their front. So I guess kind of interesting you have this mixture of personification language there of like what the land is going through, even though it's we use that same kind of language for today, but it's just really interesting. But ultimately the point is that the issue of the water being gone is now being dealt with. So the water is now being brought forth to the ground in a series of like streams or mists, depending on how you want to translate it. So we now have a wet ground, it's no longer dry. So that's the second problem. But we still don't have the plants or the humans yet. So what's the next thing that God is going to do? Well, in verse 7, then Yahweh God formed the man of dust. Hold on to that because that's really interesting. From the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living creature. All right, this one I do think we should spend at least a little bit of time on. Doesn't be a whole lot, but just a little bit. So we're dealing with the human, and the man is being made from dust of the ground, but the ground was just wet. Wet ground don't make dust. Wet ground make mud. So what are we what are we getting? So let's talk about this. Okay, so we have the dust. So let's put that to side for a second. So we're thinking about it as mud first. He's using mud almost like a clay to form the human. All right, I did an entire episode on Image of God regarding the opening of the mouth ritual or the cleansing of the mouth ritual, depending on the translation you read, where they would make their idols and statues, and then what they would do is they would do all these different rites and rituals to cleanse the mouth so that way the God that was made for could enter through the mouth and reside in that idol for their ability to worship him and for them to be with their God in that presence within the temple. Okay. And so we kind of talk about how there's some interesting parallels where God doesn't have to go through all these extra rites, but he does play with the whole he makes and shapes the human, kind of like in Genesis 1, where you have the making of God's Selim, God's image, God's idol, which is humanity. But he's also showing that he's forming it and he breathes into it. It's his own mouth purification, right? Where he's making him and he breathes into him his breath, which now is what brings this statue to life. And it's no longer just a statue, it's a living, breathing statue, which I think is kind of cool. All right. But there's a whole episode talking about that. You can go look that there. I'll link it below if you want, or if you have notes you want to go into.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick comment, which is funny that you bring up the breathing statue. All right. So in the project that I'm working on, and this is an idea that Heiser put forward, right, where and I won't give too much away, because I am going to mention it. I think I put it in my notes. Whatever. In the class that we teach, which is how the pagans would specifically buy statues that you could like open the mouths of, because then when they opened the mouth, it was considered like a breathing statue.
Yeah.
And the god would come and dwell inside the idol then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that I thought was interesting how that was phrased, and how, it's very much the human being trying to still be God, buying that breathing statue, right? Because we are the breathing statue.
Yeah. Well, it's just kind of interesting to show that the ancient people had a much deeper thought on how idols worked, and they're not as stupid as we kind of treat them as like, oh, idols, that means that's their God. If we break it, God dead. It's like, no, that's not quite how idol worship works. But that language plays a lot into here, which is again paralleling Genesis 1 of like, look, God has made his statues, God has made his idols and his humanity. He has made his people to be the representations on earth, to be the heavenly representations on earth. And that is just this really cool thing. But again, the key interesting detail that's also here, so I could go on about the mouth purification, right, is that wet ground makes, water makes the ground muddy. It doesn't make it dusty. So why the word dust? Like, why is that word used there instead of like this mud or clay? Why didn't just talk about the clay and mud? Why use this word why use implicit language for the mud instead of using direct language? Why just skip to dust? So majority of the usages of this word in light of humanity, so when it's tied to humanity specifically, majority of its usages is in reference to man's frailty and mortality. And it's kind of like showing that human beings have a mortality here from the start, that they are dependent completely on God. God is the source of life because he's the one who breathes into it. They're not just this creature just can just go out and be whatever. They are still, from the moment they're made, completely dependent on God. So God has not yet made the Garden of Eden. Remember that too. Eden has not been made yet. We have the water We have the human, but we don't have a garden yet. Man is out in the dry land, or in this case, the muddy land, if you will. And so this would be the place that contains the tree of life that man can have access to until they're removed from the garden, which is when they are doomed to be living with the curse of death and stuck in sin. So he's making a man in the field, and they would place him in the garden east of him, or in Eden, putting him into this sacred heavenly place with a connection to potential or eternal life, if you will, like this potentiality for access to eternal life. Human is made frail and mortal, but they have access to it in the garden. In God's heavenly realm, there is access to this. Remember, this is all playing into the mountain idea of the mountain being the place where heavenly and earthly meet, which means outside of that mountain, outside of that garden spot, if you will, or that mountain spot, is frailty, is mortality, which is where man is made. They're made from dust. They're made from the clay. They are made here, and that's how dust is used in reference to humanity. It's used as they're frail and mortal. They're completely independent on who God is and his power and his ability to provide that life.
Right. And let's consider, so you mentioned garden, mountain, and frailty there.
Yeah.
Right. And as you were saying that, I couldn't help but think of the Garden of Gethsemane, which is on the Mount of Olives. And it is Jesus in this moment of frailty, right? This moment of vulnerability where he's saying to God, I understand what the plan is, but I don't really want to do it.
Yeah.
That very human moment that Jesus has with the Father, right? And the Spirit grieving with him, right? And he has this very human moment of vulnerability, of frailty in the garden on the mountain.
Yeah.
Right? This meeting of heaven and earth. Also, heaven and earth meeting in the person of Christ.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have the two natures present in Christ. It's like this layers upon layers of meta.
It's so many things.
You have the mountain, which is the meeting of heaven and earth. You have the garden, which is the meeting of heaven and earth. You have Christ, who is the meeting. Oh, frickin' guy! Every time. Which you have like all these layers of like meta upon meta upon meta, right? Because you have the garden, which is the meeting of heaven and earth, and the mountain, which is the meeting of heaven and earth, and Christ, who is heaven and earth, right? In one person, you have, and then you have this mention here of dust, right? This vulnerability, this frailty, right? That, Christ is approaching what human beings will be, right? In the Genesis 2 narrative, right? Where it's saying dust, you have, the reason that dust is so fleeting is because you will die.
Yeah.
And that's what Christ is facing down, right? He's facing down. He knows he is going to die. He's
about to enter, as we talk about in the chaos, like he's about to enter into a decreation of himself. Like he's going to be entering into death. His human body is about to go into dust. He's going outside the garden. He's going outside into the wilderness, into the Tehom, to bring back people into the garden, which is so beautiful and so cool to think about. But yeah, I love how you tied that together with Mount of Olives and Gethsemane. It's wild to just see like how all these just encapsulate into the person of Jesus. Like almost all these narratives just tie all the way to him. And we only know two narratives,
like it was pointing to him all along.
Oh, that's crazy. So, next verse. And Yahweh God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man who he had formed. And Yahweh God caused to grow from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food. Okay, so now we have the garden. We have Eden, which means pleasure, delight, and paradise. Okay, so I think it's interesting. So let's use that other word there. So God plants paradise, and he puts human in paradise. Puts the frail human inside paradise. Okay, and now we've created all these plants. Next verse, now a river flowed out from paradise that watered the garden, and from there it diverged and became 4 branches. The name of the first is the Pishon. It went around all the land of Havilah, where there is gold. The gold of the land is good. Bdellium and onyx stones are there. And the name of the second is Gihon. It around all the land of Cush. And the name of the third is Tigris. It flows east of Assyria and the 4 rivers in Euphrates. Another verse that gets really overlooked. I'm just going to quickly show the fun geographical tie here. So one river in Eden breaks off into 4. Havilah, if we look at geographically with where they are in the biblical map world, Havilah is on the way to Egypt. Okay, so there's one. The second goes all the way around Cush. Tigris goes east of Assyria, and Euphrates there does not give a direction because it goes through Babylon. So you get descriptions of the 3, and the other one is kind of like saying, oh yeah, there's this one. But it goes through Babylon, which is like the enemy of Israel. But here's the interesting thing. The rivers are going in 4 directions. They're covering, for them, from my understanding, the whole world as far as they understand it. It is in their way of saying, like, Eden is the source of the life of the rest of the world. Like, it bleeds life out into everything else. It's like
almost like Adam and Eve.
I know. It's weird how God's heavenly spot is supposed to be the home point, the beacon point that bleeds off into everything else, or to just kind of goes into everywhere else to show that there's life. The rivers of the world extend from this one river in Eden, of which rivers tend to flow also downward. Remember, rivers go downward. So we already have an implicit of, wait a minute, Eden's the source, waters are going, this is paradise, and the waters they travel downward. This must be a mountain. This must be a very high place. Because in order to water all these nations, it has to be very high up to reach all these other places that are around them. There's a strong implicit language that's being used to show that Eden is in fact a mountain. Now, we can go on about people like saying maybe not, maybe yes, but I'll use at least one verse. I have another one, but Caleb's exhausted, so I'll only go over one. Ezekiel 28, 13 through 14 reads, you were in Eden. It says, Yahweh's message through Ezekiel to one of the kings, comparing him to the rebel of Genesis 3. So you were in Eden, the garden of God. So there's the key. So this rebel is in the garden of God, and every precious stone was your adornment. And if we keep reading, he describes all these adornments that are on him, and that he's the goal is the craftsmanship of your settings and your mountings, and you, and on the day when you're created, he keeps talking about like how beautiful he was. You were an anointed guardian cherub, and I placed you on God's holy mountain. So it just connected the holy mountain with the garden, saying God's holy mountain and God's garden, they're one the same thing. And then we get in like verse another verse, in the abundance of your trade you were filled with violence in your midst, and you sinned, so I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God. Well, where is the rebel cast from in Genesis 3? He's cast from the garden. So the garden and the mountain are linked together as being one the same thing. And Joel chapter 2 does a very similar thing where it links Zion with the garden and the mountain. It's talking about the mountain of Zion with the garden, and how they are supposed to be like Zion's becoming the new Garden of Eden in some assets. And so Eden is being shown here geographically as being one, the source of life for the rest of the world, as part of the whole creation of the rest of the world, because now life is having a beginning point and is pouring out everywhere else. And is also, because of the way rivers work, is going downhill into everywhere else. It is like supposed to be the high mountain.
Undefeated.
It is supposed to be the highest mountain. It is the high point. So this is like the place to be. This is the highest point you can truly be, to be with the gods. And this is where God takes the frail mortal human and puts him into this place. And so this is the place, and God has placed him in there. But what's interesting is that after we get this geographical description, is that it then again states that Yahweh God took the man and set him in the garden. So he was put in the garden. Hey, this is the mountain. This is the source of life. By the way, God put him in the garden. So we're like bookending it, like saying, yeah, the source of life, man's here. If you didn't get it, man's here. And so we already noted this, but the narrative seems to be using this to return back to the human project, that it is not just meant to be like the source of life geographically, it is meant to be the source of life for humanity. This is where humanity is supposed to be. And humanity is supposed to be branching out from. Humanity is supposed to be branching out from Eden to fill the rest of the earth. the Eden ideal, the Eden message, the Eden purpose of subduing and ruling everything that God has bestowed upon them. All right, so man, again, outside the garden, but in the garden, which we've talked about before, how mountains are like temples, or the precursor for temples. If you thought about this temple, this is the holiest of holies. And you got down the mountain, which would be the holy place, and then the rest of the world would be, well, the courtyard. And so we have that if you have a temple and you have an idol in there, well, you also need to have a priest in there. And so Adam is playing two roles. He's playing the role of the idol figure, and he's playing the role of the priest. Oh, by the way, because he's also given the command to rule, he's playing a third role of like a prince or a king. So we get the first 3-tier office. We're going to see, obviously in Genesis 3, that he doesn't fulfill that office, but Jesus comes in as a new Adam, who again fills the 3-tier office. We have the priest who is in the temple, the idol's also in the temple, but the king the king or prince, whichever word you want to use for Adam in this case, is at the temple in like the kingdom where the ultimate king is reigning over him and tending to him to prepare him to go out. And then Eve is made in the garden. We're going to read a little bit later. And so she'd be like the priestess with the priest. They're the ones who are supposed to go out and rule over all these things and to subdue and spread out all these things. And so this is the functioning of the cosmic temple, the cosmic mountain, if you will. And Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, from every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but from the tree of knowledge of Tov and Ra you shall not eat, for when you eat from it, you will be doomed to die. Now, most of you might have a different translation there, and I do make a purposeful change. But we'll go through it one by one, and Caleb, you might kind of see why as we go along. So first off, every tree is available, minus the tree of wisdom. But the key point is, again, is the tree of life is being given access to the man of frailty and mortality. That the dust figure is given access to the potentiality of eternal life through the access to the tree. And so it's here that many will complain that God provides this command regarding the Tov and Ra tree, as if he's providing without support, if you will, for following this command. Like he's saying, like, hey, you just gave him this tree and there's nothing to help him. But the issue is coming from a lack of clarity of reading the text in full. Eve is shown to be first off discerning in Genesis 3, which kind of shows that she did have a level of wisdom, and she saw that was good, as part of it. So she determined it was Tov. Not only got that, but God is teaching them in this moment how to be wise and discern, saying, okay, saying right now, don't do this. Positives, live. Negatives, die. Trust me, live. Go against me, die. Now, that's an oversimplification, I know. Very much an oversimplification, but that kind of gets the point that God has not left them without any support. He's setting this all up for them.
Right. And we have to remember that since we are statues made in God's image, we do bear to a degree some of his attributes, right? To a lesser degree now, obviously, right? But Proverbs 8, God has wisdom.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and given that we are made in the image of a perfectly good God, we have to understand that Adam and Eve knew right and wrong. They knew good from bad. Right? This is not something that, like, as you said, that he's just plopping them down and they have no idea really what that means. They understand what that means. That's not what's at play here, but I won't step on your toes.
No, I think that's good because, as you're saying, some of the things that we share with him is the product of being in his image. They're not the thing that makes the image, but they're the product of being the image. It is the ends, if you will, but they're not. Or sorry, it is the. I don't know if I'm gonna say the ends to mean. Because we're image, we have these roles, we have these abilities, these things that are given to us. Some that are similar to other creatures, and some that are distinct from other creatures, or some that are more advanced than other creatures. But the thing here is that God has provided this entire garden that's flourishing with life. There's only one thing that they're prohibited to have, and that's the thing that will remove them from the garden. But this plays into the whole how they get removed from the garden whenever you get to Genesis 3, which we're not going to do today. But don't worry, we're not going to do that. So God is teaching them wisdom in the moment of this initial command that he's giving to Adam. And so in warning of Adam of the danger of eating this fruit and going away apart from God and trusting his own senses, it would lead to a separation from life, which would be death, because he's trusting in himself and his senses apart from God, who has this full knowledge and understanding and senses. So his command is not that they would never eat of it, but they were not to eat of it now, and to trust that relying on God for wisdom and life is what will bring fruition. So whether it be God allows them to eat eventually, or that God is going to provide them the wisdom slowly over time, kind of like a father teaching his child. Especially as, they're brand new creations. We don't know like what that really means, but there's a layer of like, they just got here. There's, and God has decided to be a relational being. Well, relational beings engage in shaping each other. And in this case of God as a father, he's growing them as his children. Like he's teaching into them like they're his children. Times with the tree of life, it would be better to see that the tree extends life rather than being an instant granted of immortality, as is not prohibited from them. And we have no reason to say that they did or did not eat from the tree. At least that's my opinion. I don't know if we can just jump to say, well, they didn't eat of it. They had full availability to it. And we don't know how long it was between 2 and 3. Doesn't say. So it'd be probably better to say that it has potential to increase their life, which would be their way of getting eternal life. So all we know is that after rebelling, they were removed from the tree, so they would not have access to it due to their sin, or with their sin, if you will. And so this is in conjunction with the warning of the tree, to the point of them being doomed to die, because they would have to be removed from the presence of the tree of life, and therefore not having access to something that could extend their life and go back to a purely a state of mortality, if you will, or like in just eternal sense. So before being removed, they have access to the tree of life, but then the tree of knowledge, or the tree of wisdom, if you will, if they take of it, they will lose access to it because they'll be removed from it. And it would be almost better to understand this description here, as many will say, you will surely die, as you'll be doomed to die. As many have argued that the grammar there and the way it's used, especially in like passages, I think it's like in Jeremiah and other places, it's used of like, this is a consequence that is going to happen, like you're doomed to face this. And so you're doomed to die, like you're going to be on this trajectory of death. You're going to be separated from life itself because you have gone this other way apart from it. You've gone into the way of disorder. You've gone to the way of decreation, the way of lacking of God's presence. You want to be outside the garden rather be inside the garden. And so I think that's all kind of important, because we have within the garden spot is there's still a test for, if you will, I don't know, maybe not test, but test at the same time, for the humans there to respond to God, which we said that on mountains, there are moments for humans to respond to God in this testing spot. So this is all like the huge big step for every other mountain scene, where it's the presence of God, it's the place of life, it's the temple, it is a place of testing, the fullness of God, like this idea of like almost like being in the fullness of God, if you will, like for them is there, this idea of being in his presence fully there. Because not like it's just in a temple or the tabernacle or in the Ark of the Covenant. It's like you see him there, or his manifestation, if we will. And this is the spot where, if we just kept on reading, we see how there's the helper who is made, that is Eve, and you have the animals that are there. This is the fully flourishing life spot that no other mountain has. There is no other mountain that has the fully life flourishing like this truly has, and has access to the potentiality of, if you will, eternal life, and until sin enters the picture. All right, so we're cruising through this a little bit. We're not going to read, obviously, the whole chapter. We'd just be here forever doing that, because there's so many things to just kind of dissect. And so I kind of want to just get to the next point of where we get God making the woman, all right? Because the big point is less about the animals that are there, because that's kind of like playing to the whole, like the full flourishing and everything, but kind of seeing human role in this, right? And Yahweh God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. While he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh where it had been. So just a couple quick interesting things here within the Hebrew, I think, because this is also going to play into the mountain narrative. There's so many things just play into it. So we have the word tardama, which is the word that is referred to as the deep sleep. It's used 7 times, often as deep sleep in many cases. So we have like Genesis 15, First Samuel 26, Job 4, Job 33. Like we have a bunch of instances. And so what's interesting is that in each of these passages, there is either a danger in the human realm of which the sleeper is unaware of, or there is an insight in the visionary realm to be gained, meaning that this person is receiving some kind of like message or vision. There's either some kind of danger or there's a vision. What's up?
In this case, the danger is his wife.
No. I was not going there. Almost not there yet. Oh my gosh, Caleb.
Oh man, you're welcome.
Oh my gosh. So with all this said, Tartama is not in most of his cases, and it's not in every case, is it strictly just like they fell asleep. There are some cases where that is the case, but it plays into there's also a vision that's being taken place, or there's some kind of danger or like warning or something that's going to happen. So in regards to the vision possibility, it is interesting that the Septuagint, actually, the translator, shows the use of Greek word in Genesis 2:21, of which is the same word in Genesis 15:12 in the Hebrew or in the Greek as well, that can be translated as visions, trances, and ecstasy.
Yeah.
That word is used there. And this is the word is also used in like Acts 10, 11, 22 for the word trance. This idea is also shown in the Vulgate amongst the church fathers, where Jerome shows the Latin word to refer to abnormal sleep, or sopor, which is referring to coming about in trances. So there's this long train of idea of like, okay, we have a deep sleep here, but it's tied in some cases to a trance and vision. And now with the Septuagint to say it's a trance and vision, and we have the Vulgate with Jerome treating it as a trance and vision, of which the data shows that Adam's sleep is not merely just he fell asleep, but it could be that he is being prepared for a visionary experience and not just a surgical procedure. Now, that could still be part of it, but in that vision, he's seeing the fact that he's being opened and that he's being pulled from this rib, and then there's the formation of Eve. Adam is receiving this really interesting mixture of like this very physical visionary experience of the forming of Eve.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me at the very least that the Greek here, to kind of tack on to that, uses a word that most accurately means like it filled his flesh. And when it says that it closed up, the Greek actually would be closer to say like it filled his flesh.
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting way of putting it, right? It's not just that, as you're saying, right, like this, it's not just the surgical procedure, right, where it's just something is taken out. No.
Yeah.
It's this idea of like he is opened up, and then yes, something is removed to make Eve, but then there's a filling, right?
Yes.
There's this replacing, there's this putting back, right? This completion again.
Yeah. What's interesting is that with what you were saying and the whole idea of this trance and this vision, Walton kind of notes in his commentary that this seems to be less just this mere description of like Eve's physical origin, but also like her, if you will, her ontological relation to the man. That she is not just like this other creation. She and him share the same flesh. They are the same bone, the same flesh. They are one. It is not like Adam's receiving this vision of like this person that God has made. I'm not just waking up and, oh, look, this person appeared. Where'd you come from? It's like God is showing this vision of like, wait, you are making me my true counterpart, my true equal, my true helper. And it's her. This is the one that I am to rule over this creation with. I'm supposed to be the Selim with. I'm supposed to be this priest with, this king with. If I'm the king, then she's my queen. If I'm the prince, she's my princess. If she's like all these things, like this is my equal. This is the one who truly is my helper. Of which is interesting is the word for helper is in almost majority of its case, maybe not majority, but a large number of its cases as used of God is the same word as used of Eve. Like it's just a strong, powerful helper that's coming in to save or to protect or to defend. And that Eve is there to be that support for them.
So would you say she's called to defend?
You could say that. You could say that, yeah. On this mount, you have the flourishing of life. You have the presence of God. You have visions from God. You get testing moments amongst God's teachings and all these things. All of this will be playing out throughout the rest of the narrative. And there's still so much more that could be said because, again, there's just so many things here. I mean, other things we didn't really even talk about, like there's unity amongst the creatures, amongst the creator and the created. There's peace, there's joy, there's love, there's all this things that are just kind of together that Jesus talks about how he is telling his people that this is what the kingdom of God is about in regards to what it means to be part of the kingdom of heaven and what the new creation is going to be like. All of it's here, which means there is no reason to forsake any of it until they do, and until we do. But I think the key part of why all this exists is because this is where his personal presence is. This is heaven and earth's meeting spot. This is where God is dwelling. As we see, like in Genesis 3, it talks about how he's walking in the cool of day. Or like he's coming by. They can hear him coming as if he's walking by. I mean, like he is showing up in a way. He's not just like calling down. They hear him moving through. Like he manifests himself here with them in so many places, just as he does in many of the other mountain moments where he appears in some form, whether it be through the angel or through this figure in the skies. He's there. All this works because this is where he is. This is his place. And when you're outside of that place, you're into the dust. You're into that frail mortality. You're inside the decreation. You're in that dust, that watery zone, those two extremes. Outside that guard, you don't have that, not just a moderation. You have that one peak spot in the middle of the moderation, like that perfect spot where like you can be like, yeah, you could use a little more water. Yeah, you could use a little more dry land. This is it. Nothing's better than this. And that's the first mountain. That is the opening mountain.
Well said. So we hope that you have enjoyed this session of mountains. Josh definitely cooked. I turned on the microwave basically for my contribution. But either way, we do hope that you enjoyed. We hope that this is a series that you are finding interesting thus far. And that you were just at least learning things about scripture that you didn't know before. We hope to continue this series as the Lord wills it. I don't necessarily know exactly what we're looking at next time because Josh is a sneaky little boy, but
I can tell you. We're going to Noah's Ark resting on the mountain.
I thought so. I thought we were going to hit Ararat, but
yeah, we're going to go there.
Wasn't totally sure.
We'll go there a little bit, and we'll go to either Genesis 11 or we'll go to Abraham's testing. I haven't decided officially yet.
Cool. Well, speaking of Noah's Ark resting on the mountains, you can go ahead and rest on our like and subscribe button. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. That's what free means. Good job, Caleb. It is free, and it really helps us out a ton. It lets us know that you are engaging with this content, and hopefully we will have cemented 200 subscribers by the time that this comes out, although that is very much still up in the air. With all that said, guys, we thank you so much for watching, and Lord willing, we will see you next time. Peace.